Another important thing, as I've mentioned to you at the beginning of the week, every year, Sergi as well as here, we have the chance to welcome an artist in residence. An artist in residence means he will come for doing his art on the walls. That's why we have on the first floor the Everest one. On the fifth floor, we have also two other painting walls, actually. And he has started yesterday. Michael has started yesterday. Again, with your tutors, you can take any time to discuss with him, to discuss this art. That's also the purpose, to have an artist in residence here. So Michael, I'm going to introduce him on Friday. He will give a talk to us, but please feel free to go and to see him. So that's on the fifth floor. As you can see here on the right side, there is another artist, Didier Jabat, that was the artist of 2019. And this year, it's Michael. OPPI, let me just share with you very quickly what we've done. I guess it's here. The last couple of so 65 participants. So please, I highly encourage you again to come and vote. 65 participants. Let's check the common ground. The common ground changed a bit. The consensus altogether, maybe that's due to the talk from A.C.R.E. last Monday. 2015, more women will be prominent positions, whether politic or private sectors. Everybody agree about that. In 2050, Asia will be the first economic continent and China will be the US. Again, consensus there. If we look at the divisive one, three divisive opinion. 2050 dramatically drop the CO2 emission. Disagree. 2050, the end of malnutrition, 55. And more humanistic, 61. And again, if we look at, according to where you come from, there is a quite huge difference again with French people still pessimistic. And which is interesting, that would be more humanistic. So Indian are more optimistic than French, or the Italians, Morocco. Another one it's interesting is this one, the CO2 emission. The CO2 emissions, so you can look at the Italians, so France, Germany, Indian are quite optimistic. And if you look at this one, a very interesting one, it's the end of extreme nutrition problem. Indian students as well, 75% believe that we can fix that, when French doesn't believe that, not so much. China as well, quite optimistic on that. So it's interesting to look at that. We can look as well as the gender of or age. We had, yesterday, we had different opinions, new statements. So we had 2050 will be more prepared to handle any pandemic or the transition economy. So again, as I've mentioned to you, important to go back and try to vote today. It doesn't take so much time to do it, right? So let's start the conference of the day, to start the day. And I will just introduce Louis Eng. Louis Eng is the speaker of today, and I will come some students on stage as well with him. First of all, Louis Eng. Louis Eng is a Singapore Member of Parliament. He has been serving as People Action Party's MP for a Nee Soon committee since 2015. He is the chairman for the Government Parliamentary Committee for Sustainability and Environment. He is the grassroots advisor for Nee Soon East constituency and advisor to the Nee Soon Town Council. Louis is a founder of A.C.R.E.S, a Singapore-based charity advocating for an end to animal cruelty in Asia. Louis received his Bachelor in Science in Biology from the National University of Singapore in US, and his Master of Science in Primate Conservation from the Oxford University. In 2014, Louis was presented with the Advocate of the Year Award in the inaugural Singapore Advocacy Awards. In 2011, Luis received the inaugural Yahoo Singapore Award in 2011, as I mentioned, which recognized 9 Singaporeans who really made a difference in the past years. In 2007, Luis was presented with the Outstanding Young Persons of Singapore Award. 2002, Luis received HSBC National Youth Achievement Award in recognition for his outstanding contribution in the field of environmental protection and nature conservation in Singapore. Thank you very much, Luis, for being with us. It's an honor and privilege. Please come. Thank you very much. We have decided with Luis to have an interactive session and to have some students to prepare the talk, to have such as like a vivid and interactive conversation. So I would love to call on stage. Thank you to welcome with me Namakshi, Vitya, Theo, and James. Thank you very much. So I will let you interact according to the questions you have prepared, but maybe, Louis, you can start, of course, if you want.
Very good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Actually, they was asking whether I'll do a presentation, but I try not to do presentations so that we have a more free-flowing dialogue, so you can ask me anything you want. And there's no limits and no boundaries, but I think some of them have drafted some questions. We can start the conversation, and then as we move on along the hour or so, again, anything that comes on your mind, anything on policies of Singapore, the things I do, the things I raise in Parliament, feel free to ask me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eng. It's a real honor to have you with us today. If we take a look back at the history of Singapore, it has been forged by different ethnic groups that composed it. Do you think this diversity will be the Singaporeans' key asset in 2050?
So that has always been the cornerstone of Singapore. We were a country of migrants who came from many different countries. My grandmother actually came from China. My grandfather from Indonesia. So it wasn't long ago where we really were a whole city of migrants. But the early leaders, our Prime Minister then, Lee Kuan Yew, really put a lot of effort to make sure there was a lot of ethnic integration, because everybody was coming from all over the world into Singapore, and we wanted to make sure that everybody can get along. In our history, you will see there was some tension, there were some ethnic riots as well along the way, but that's why we put a lot of emphasis to make sure that all of us from different races, different religion can come together. And we sort of embedded that firstly into our housing policies. So in public housing, where 70–80% of us live, we make sure that there isn't an enclave where it's all Chinese or a block where there's all Malays. We make sure that there's the ethnic integration quotas. So that's important in terms of how we develop Singapore to make sure that there is room for every race and every religion.
Okay. Thank you very much. For me, in my opinion, you have a country like Switzerland to have 4 languages, your cultural language, so it's a real, strength for the future to embrace it, to evolve, and I think, Singapore has a real chance to become a nation of the future, a real one. Now, if we travel in 1965, the Singapore Chamber of Commerce urged Lee Kuan Yew to choose Chinese as national and official language. He refused because he wanted to emphasize English, because one of the main reasons, to take English as official language was to promote the economic benefit for Singapore. Do you think English and its learning in school will remain a key focus to be maintained in the coming decades? And so, what do you think will be the main challenges for the education of Singapore for the future, of course?
Actually, the main challenge is not whether English is going to be taught. I think the main challenge in Singapore now is our mother tongue. so our second language, on Chinese or Malay or Tamil. A lot of the younger generation now are weaker in mother tongue. They're very strong in English. And that's why we're trying to bring sort of a movement now to make sure that our students can speak Chinese or Malay or Tamil. If you look at our primary schools, we have in a curriculum something called the Citizenship and Character and Citizenship Education, or CCE. That used to be taught in English, and that's quite an important part of the curriculum where they learn about being citizens, learn about character building. That one, we've changed it to being taught in their mother tongue now. So to sort of bring the other languages back to the forefront. But again, at the very early stage, we realized in 1965, when we were kicked out of Malaysia, and we became our own independent state, we realized that we are going to be completely reliant on trade. We don't have much agriculture, we don't have even our own water supply, and we were going to have to be heavily reliant on trade. And that's why we chose English as our main language, so that the trade can thrive here. But at the same time, we were strategic. If you look at our national anthem, that's actually in Malay, to recognize that all our neighbors actually are Malay speaking. And then we had in our education system, the mother tongue. So not just either or, but we made sure that we sort of incorporate everything into our policies.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, if we look recently, in 2003, Singapore was heavily touched by the SARS virus. What do you think were the lessons learned that enabled Singapore to better manage the COVID-19 crisis?
So we learned a lot from the SARS outbreak. I mean, I was in secondary school then. But if you look at the SARS pandemic and now the COVID-19 pandemic, you will see that we came out a bit stronger. One, because learning from SARS, we started to stockpile the face masks, the surgical gowns. So when the rest of the world was running out of these items, we actually had a whole stockpile already. Same, of course, we had a whole stockpile of food as well. Many people didn't realize that, and that's why we sort of released this information when people started going to the supermarkets to try and start hoarding the items. We started to tell everyone actually we were ready for this pandemic. They always have been, because we have our own government stockpile of, again, the masks, the surgical gowns, of food items as well. We learned there how to isolate, how to quarantine, and to make sure that everything medically was ready to handle this pandemic. Of course, we learned more lessons along the way during this pandemic. The migrant workers issues came up on how the living conditions can be improved, and I think that's a whole learning process. And I hope, well, like all of you, I hope we can get out of this pandemic soon. The vaccinations have started. And if you've seen it, I think the other hallmark or cornerstone of this government is that we plan way ahead. And that's why we managed to get the vaccines into Singapore quite early. And as we shared now publicly, the minute we sort of realized this could be a pandemic, Singapore government already placed orders for the vaccination, which were sort of in the research stage. And that's why we're one of the first in Asia to get the vaccines now. And of course, we make sure we're, like our food supply, we can't be held ransom by a single source. And that's why you see that Singapore, we have about 4, if I'm not wrong, 4 different vaccines that we have ordered now, to make sure that if one fails, we have a backup. If there isn't enough of the Pfizer, we have the Moderna that will come in as well. And that, again, is how we make sure we plan ahead to make sure that we can counter any unforeseen circumstances.
Yes. And I think we can say also that Singapore improved in the hospital or all the things like this, and also the path of every patient, the hours or days before they was contaminated, and also the quickly treatment, and also the test was really good for the Singaporean. I think now we can move to the next subject with Theo. I will hand over to him.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mr. Ng, to Mr. ESSEC. So, thanks to this kind of issues, Singapore has do a lot of improvement in healthcare, improvement in quality of life of Singaporean, that has led Singapore to Singapore having one of the highest life expectancies in the world, coupled with a low fertility rate, Singaporean society is facing a crisis in aging. So the average age of people is projected to reach 53 in 2050. There's already a trend of older people re-entering the workforce to keep themselves occupied or to support themselves financially. And this number of people will increase, as a lot of Singaporean people said that they are not prepared financially for retirement. So how do you see the market work evolve in the next years? And what are the challenges to the social and economic challenges to get the older people in the work market?
So we've been preparing for this for quite a while now, that we have a serious problem with an aging population. It is existential, and then you couple that, as what you rightly pointed out, with a very low fertility rate. I think it's, if I'm not wrong, 1.07 or 1.08, which means every generation of Singaporeans, we halve ourselves. For every 2 Singaporeans, they're only giving birth to 1 baby. So that really is an issue, because the bulk of our population are going to be seniors, which means that they won't be the one paying taxes. And then we have the younger generation, like all of you here, which are going to be working and trying to support the seniors. And that's one reason why, as we shared, we might have to increase our GST in Singapore. That is on a simple fiscal level, that we won't be able to balance the budget anymore. Because again, less people are paying taxes, more people are using the taxes from the government. And that's why we're looking at it now and seriously considering whether we have to raise the GST. It's for many different purposes, but as we've shared, one of the main purpose really is healthcare. A lot of the healthcare in Singapore is not free, but heavily subsidized. And to continue that kind of subsidy for an increasing number of people, we're going to have to prepare, and that means to increase the GST. As you rightly mentioned, we are also looking into increasing the retirement age, the re-employment age. We have already increased that to 67, because we realize that Singaporeans are passing on at a much later age. So if you don't increase the retirement age, there's going to be a longer period where they live without an income, and that they, again, as you rightly pointed out, they won't be able to sustain themselves. So we're looking into increasing that further. Not just to make Singaporeans work longer and longer, but again with the reality that they are living longer. We're looking at all the CPF issues as well, and to make sure that people can sort of retire and be financially sustainable. So it wasn't that recent, but that's why we introduced CPF Life as well. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with our CPF scheme. But that sort of makes sure that you get monthly payouts from your CPF account until you pass on, instead of previously where it is on a fixed number of years. So with your money in your retirement account now, if you live to 120, the government will give you that monthly payout till you're 120. There are many more things that we are planning. Budget actually will be next month in Parliament. We will share more about how we will help our seniors and the aging population. I'll end with the last part, which is how we want to make sure that not just financially they can retire well, but to make sure that they actually have a good quality of life as well. And as you've seen recently, we have announced that we're setting up a sort of a new HDB or public housing in Singapore for our seniors, where they can not go into the retirement, so they're old folks' home, where they live in like a dormitory setting, but now they can retire in their own homes. And it's sort of like the British example, where each have their own house. If they come out to, there's a common area where they can meet each other, where we could even serve meals. If they're in their own homes and they face an issue, and there's an emergency, there's an alarm in their own house. But essentially, they have the freedom and be able to live independently, so they can age gracefully as well.
Thank you. So you talked about raising the taxes. About the CPF, there will be an increasing in the contribution also, which is part.
We've gradually increased the contribution actually.
Which is part of the employer and the employee. So how do you think this will impact the competitiveness of the industries?
I don't think it will impact it that much. I mean, if you look at the income tax, corporate tax, that we've always kept very low. And that's the crucial to make Singapore competitive. Even if you look at the GST, what we're currently charging and some of the proposed increase, that still puts us as one of the lowest GST in at least this region and in Asia. So competitiveness, I think, will always remain high on our agenda. With the seniors, well, over the years, some of the CPF contribution have increased. If you look, we've also have the special employment credits. And that's for the seniors. So if you hire a senior, the government gives you grants as well. There's a whole range of programs and subsidies that we give out to help our seniors.
Okay. And do you think the immigration can be a solution to balance the aging of the population and then to have more people that will pay for retirement?
That has to be a solution. So we are trying hard to increase our total fertility rate, but I think you young people here don't want to get married anymore, right? And from what I can tell, most of you don't want to have children. Show of hands, I'm just curious. How many of you want children? Not too bad, about half. How many of you want to have children before you are 35? Oh, lesser hands. Okay, because 35 is sort of an important age. Beyond that, the fertility drops quite significantly. Shall I scare you all further? And as you know, I just delivered a motion in Parliament on the IVF treatments to get more help for them. But past 35, fertility really drops. And so we're trying to push hard trying to get Singaporeans to have kids. But I've always shared this is not something that perhaps we can force people to. So we have the baby bonus. If you have kids, we'll give you money. We have the CDAC account. If you have kids and you put savings, the government gives you a one-to-one. So we'll double your savings for your children. We've put all that financial incentives in place. But to be very honest, that has not moved the needle very much. I think the younger generation now wants to go out and have fun, explore the world, although you can't anymore with COVID. So you might as well stay and have kids. But at the same time then, as we have to acknowledge, then we have to top up the population with immigration. And so, I stand corrected the numbers, but we have about 50,000 new immigrants into Singapore every year. I think 20,000 PR, 30,000 new citizens. And that really is to top up, to make sure that we can break even. For lack of a better word to say all this, but in the more financial term. And so to make sure our population doesn't decline. Because once we have that, again, it's existential. We are literally running out of Singaporeans now. It's worse in other countries. I think in Japan, it's below 1 already. Which means we're not even, it will be more than half of drop in every generation in terms of population. But we're trying, so we're looking at other different ways, lowering the stress level. As you know, we're trying to work hard on the work-life balance, working from home, more flexible work arrangements, staggered working hours. We're looking at all this to make sure that people, our citizens, have time to relax outside of work as well.
Thank you. So, as you said, being financially good is nice, but it's also about the condition of living. And as you may know, the chronic disease increase with aging. So the elder people will need more assistance, will need more about the healthcare system. So how do you think it's possible to ensure that healthcare services will remain accessible and affordable for the increasing number of people that will reach older age?
So again, that's right, to make sure that our healthcare is accessible and affordable for everyone, that's again one reason why we have to increase the GST. So we've made that assurance in Singapore that you will not go without healthcare. If you cannot afford it, the government will pay for it. And we do this through a series of programs and subsidies. One is your own Medi-Save, which is part of your CPF account. We allow you to use that. Two really is your Medi-Shield Life, which is a government insurance. As you've seen, we've increased the limits to make sure that you can claim for more things and for a higher claim limit. And the last, which a lot of people don't realize, is we have something we call Medi-Fund. And that's administered at the hospital level. So if you go in the hospital and you tell them, the medical social worker, I really have no money for treatment, my Medi-Save is empty, I didn't sign up for Medi-Shield Life, unfortunately, the hospital can then use Medi-Fund to pay for your entire treatment. Beyond the Medi-Save, Medi-Shield, Medi-Fund, we then have our A.C.R.E.S card, which is sort of a subsidy card for the lower income as well. And so with all that in place, it's sort of a tiered system. So we don't have free medical care in Singapore. And I do agree that it shouldn't be free. Those who can afford to pay should pay. At the same time, those who can't afford to pay will always be paid for and cared for. At the same time, you see what we've done also is to set up our restructured hospital. So in my area, we have Khoo Teck Puat Hospital that handles most of the cases. And then we set up like a satellite hospital called the Yishun Community Hospitals. So once they've sort of discharged from the hospital, they still need some form of care. They can't really go home. We don't want to take up the space in the main hospital. They then go to the community hospitals. And that will sort of ease the load so far. And of course, during the pandemic, as you've seen what we have done, we've used the Singapore Expo as an isolation center. We have many different other satellite areas that we can use to make sure that we can cope. At the same time, then, to make sure that people live healthily. And that's why we had the war on diabetes, which is quite a huge problem in Singapore. To make sure that it doesn't tax the healthcare system that much, we then need to make sure that everyone stays healthy. Easier said than done, but it's quite hard to get people out of their aircon rooms now.
So you will probably need more healthcare workers. Is there any policy to encourage people to enter in this kind of career? I think more into like the nurse, because that's not very well seen in the society, but especially the elder people, they need a lot of nurses to take care of them. So is there any policy that the government wants to implement?
So for nursing, it is unfortunate. A lot of people view that as not a good job to be in. And what we have done is to try to make sure that being a nurse is sort of on par as being a doctor now. Where if you look, previously the nurses in Singapore just had a diploma. That was sort of the highest qualification they could get in Singapore. But now we've set up the degree program so that nurses can become graduates as well, like the doctors, to try and professionalize their careers, have different schemes that have to help the nurses. And I think that has helped in terms of getting more and more local nurses, but I think many of you know who have, if you have unfortunately been to the hospital, you realize that we are still quite reliant on foreign nurses in Singapore. So that's going to be work in progress. It's the same as the preschool teachers. Many people didn't want to be preschool teachers, to have such long working hours to handle the children all the time. But the same thing, what we've done is to professionalize it, to have career development for them. We've set up the National Institute of Early Childhood Education. So not just for teachers in primary school and secondary school, but now the preschool teachers have their own sort of a NIE, again, to professionalize it, and then hopeful that then more people will want to do this as a career. And by professionalizing it, we then also increase the salaries of these workers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Ang. I would like to share a little anecdote that I had when I came to Singapore. So I was in a cab and I was talking to the driver, and he told me how the people of Singapore are always looking ahead, how Singapore is going to be in the future, and how they are very happy with how government is also thinking about the future of Singapore. So we all know that in 2013, the government of Singapore developed the Singapore 2030 vision and also started planning the Terminal 5 of the Changi Airport, which is now suspended because of COVID. The construction is suspended because of COVID. So how do you think the changes in the situation because of the virus and the changes in the aviation industry will impact how Singapore's vision of the world in 2050?
Okay, got it back. There is no doubt this pandemic has affected us, I mean, in terms of life and livelihoods. But with aviation, it's obviously affected it significantly, and that's why we've put a lot of more subsidies and assistance for those in the aviation sector. But I do believe it will recover. So we've taken this time again to make the best of the pandemic. And we've taken this time to renovate our 2 terminals. Since obviously the footfall is going to be very low, we might as well take the time to renovate it. The T5, it will go ahead. Actually, it's my parliamentary colleague that's also working on it, Ms. Polly San, to carry on. If you've seen SIS release some figures where December it is rebounding, there are more and more people taking flights now. And I think that's going to progress. As we said, in terms of this pandemic, we're not looking at a risk elimination strategy. Government believes this pandemic, this virus is here to stay. It's going to take quite a bit of efforts, as we shared. It keeps mutating, as viruses do, and it might just become a common flu, maybe. But what we have tried to focus on a strategy of risk management. So bigger events, we do the testing, we do the rapid antigen tests, we make sure that we try and reduce the risk, but not look towards eliminating it. And so with air travel, that's what we're doing now, to make sure we test you before, we test you on arrival, we have the SHN to try and see how we can sort of get the industry back. It will take some time, but I have no doubt that it will rebound. And that's why we've also started some of the business lanes to allow the businesses to continue in terms of traveling between the countries.
So do you think like Singapore is like ahead of other countries in being prepared to tackle the virus? Do you think like Singapore will position itself competitively also ahead of other countries in the future?
We are, but as I shared earlier, we're worried that people become complacent now. If you look at the rest of the world, it truly is, this virus is truly raging now. Even just across the border, Malaysia just declared a state of emergency till August of this year. And then it's back to lockdown. Same with a lot of countries. So we are ahead of the curve, I would say, without a doubt, in terms of the arrival of the vaccination, in terms of the different programs, in terms of our contact tracing. But we're just telling everyone being ahead of the curve doesn't mean much, because it just takes one case for this whole thing to spread again. And that's what happened in Hong Kong. If you know, we had a travel bubble we've set up with Hong Kong. We were, people bought the flights already, and that's why many people were upset. But all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, Hong Kong, the cases just sprang up again. And so we need to make sure that everyone doesn't get complacent, which we truly are. If you walk around the parks and nature reserves, you'll see everyone gathering in big groups. We're going out with a lot of enforcement efforts to make sure that we can remain ahead of the curve. And that's, again, going to take some time. The vaccinations is going to not be done in a few months. We're expecting perhaps the 3rd quarter of this year before everyone gets fully vaccinated. But again, as we shared and as WHO has shared, it's not going to change this pandemic if one country becomes fully vaccinated. We need the whole world and all of us to work together now to make sure we can eliminate this virus. If you've seen quite scarily some of the cases we have seen so far, they've came into Singapore, they've tested negative, they finished their stay-home notice, they tested negative, and after that they were positive. So this virus is quite ahead of us in terms of our research and our ability to tackle this. So the most important thing is for us to stay ahead is for everyone to make sure we abide by all the measures that we've put in place.
Another thing I wanted to ask, Singapore is very dependent on the imports for the food consumption in the country, and now with like emerging technologies, there are a lot of things which can help Singapore grow food with like lesser land usage. So is the government planning to invest a lot in like these technologies so that like in future Singapore is relying lesser on imports and is more self-sufficient?
We are definitely. So that's our Singapore food story now. We have a 30-30 goal, which is 30% of our food we grown locally by 2030. That's on the way. So if you look at a lot of the rooftop car parks, the rooftops of the car parks, that's going to actually turn into farming areas. Not for fun, so not your community farming where residents can rent it to plant things, but actually commercial farms so that we can see how we can grow our own food. Almost going back into time now where we had a lot of farming previously, it was all gone. We're trying to bring that back. As you rightly pointed out, we are also trying to grow our own food in the labs. Everybody's been asking me whether I'll eat it. I've been vegetarian for 20 years now. So you can grow your own meat now in the laboratory. It's exciting for Singapore because, again, we really don't have much animal farms now. We have a few egg farms for the eggs, chicken farms, sorry, for the eggs, but everything else we have phased out. But now we have the opportunity to grow our own meat. That's actually on sale in Singapore already in some of the restaurants. And that's exciting because we then won't be reliant on imports. But at the same time, with food security, we're not that scared. As you've seen during the pandemic, if Malaysia closes the causeway where a lot of our food supply comes from, we have other food sources. And we've made sure that we cannot be held ransom by any farm or any country. And we've diversified it enough to make sure that the food source will always be there. And that's why we had some issue with eggs during the pandemic, if you remember. And we told Singaporeans not to worry, and as you've seen, we will mobilize then our other sources, and they all came in. We will never run out of food here. And we know how Singaporeans love your food, so as a government, we'll make sure that we'll never run out of food. Are there many vegetarians in here? 1, 2, 3, plus me, 4. The rest of you will try? I mean, I got my mom to taste the impossible meats. I mean, she can't tell the difference anymore. And it's plant-based, there's Beyond, there's Future Meat. There's just so much options out there now. Healthier as well.
Maybe continuing on the theme of food, could you talk to us a little bit about the food waste private members bill that you're working on, and share with us about food waste in Singapore?
Okay, so that's, I'm working on a piece of legislation now to introduce in Parliament to really fight food waste. And that really started off at a hotel buffet. This was, of course, pre-COVID, where I was there with my family. My daughter wanted a piece of cake, so we went to the buffet line. At that time, they actually took out a fresh cake. I wouldn't name the hotel, but they put it there. We took a slice. We went back to our table, ate it. My other daughter wanted another cake, so we went back to the buffet line, but we were about 10 minutes late. And the buffet had closed, and in front of me, the hotel staff actually emptied the entire buffet line into the black trash bag. And that included the cake that they just brought out, which was maybe 8 slices, so 7 slices left. They threw everything away. All the macarons, everything, and that was really to my horror. And then I knew the hotel people, and I asked them why, and they said, time's up. They would throw everything away. And so I said, I have low-income residents in my area. Why don't I take the food and I can distribute it to them? They would love to have these desserts for their supper tonight. And then the hotel says, no, they can't, because they're worried of liability. If I give you the food and your resident gets food poisoning, I will get into trouble. And just because there's this liability issue, they will throw all the food away. Same if I walk around in my bakeries, if you realize after the closing time, all the bread that you see at the bakeries are thrown away. In my area, when I walk past and I ask the shop owner, actually, it's for that one, if I want to buy it now, you will sell it to me, right? And they said yes. But again, because of liability, they don't dare to donate it to other people to eat. And so again, all those food gets thrown away. It will sound scary to you, but in 2019, we threw away in Singapore 700,000 tons of food. That's one of the biggest waste streams in Singapore now. At home, 50% of the waste that people throw away actually is food. Of that, half of that, so that means about a quarter of the rubbish that we find from every resident in Singapore actually is still edible food. And that's why we're trying to introduce something called the Good Samaritan's Food Donation Act. We already have it in the US and some of the other countries, but we're planning to introduce it in Singapore so that we can tackle food waste. People can donate the food rather than throw it away, and at the same time to try and make sure that Singaporeans have, those who struggle to find 3 meals a day will have something to eat as well. That dialogue is continuing, so today actually after this I have another consultation, and that is with the hotels, the Singapore Hotel Association, to see how we can work with them. What are some of the concerns they have in terms of donation? What are the concerns they have in terms of liability? Whether we can introduce a tax exemption regime. So if you donate 10 kilos of food, you get some tax exemption in there. So that will I hate to put it in that way. That will motivate them to do something good. But I realize now that in today's world, it's not just about the goodness of your heart, that you have to provide sometimes some financial incentives, some carrots in order to elicit good behavior. So that's January and February will be 2 months of consultation. I've met up with the Restaurant Association, there's a Hotel Association, the Catering Association, and the coffee shops, the bakeries. We're meeting them, and hopefully we'll do a public consultation in March, April, and then my plan is to introduce this bill in Parliament in October this year and then pass it in November. That's the rough plan. We set up a whole committee as well, and that's how I draft my bills. It's not by me, but with the other bill that I've drafted also, we set up a committee of individuals representing different groups. So for this one, we have representatives again from the hotel, from the restaurants, the DBS Bank, the NGOs, grassroots. So everybody coming together to draft a piece of legislation that will help many people.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I think we also have kind of informal ways of trying to reduce food waste. For example, back at NUS, in my university, we had like a buffet response team. So whenever there would be like some type of event, there would be information on what the food wastage, or like the food that was left behind at the buffet, and then everyone could just come in and pick up whatever they wanted. But to have some type of legislation that that allows hoteliers and restaurants to not feel like scared of doing something good for people and helping low-income people it's something great that we should be moving forward to. Maybe let's transition towards talking about the environment now. You are the chairman of the Government Parliamentary Committee for Sustainability and the Environment. Can you maybe share with us some of the work that you do as part of the committee?
So maybe I share the upcoming work. As you'll hear shortly, it will be on climate change. We will have a private member's motion in Parliament in February to debate this issue of climate change. That will be the first most. It's a bit sad, but that will be the first motion, the first time that climate change will be debated in a motion in Parliament. And that really is to make sure that our efforts to mitigate climate change is at the forefront of our work. And as I've always shared, to make sure that sustainability is at the heart of everything we do in Singapore. So we can have the best economy, the best healthcare, the best schools, but all that will come to waste if we don't have a healthy planet to live in. If you look at these few days of rain, we've never seen rain like this before in Singapore, to be honest. If you look at the heat, it's been the hottest year in the world last year. And it's been the highest emissions as well, despite the Paris Climate Agreement, despite all the things that we're doing. To be honest, last year was a record for many things. If you've seen, the ice caps are melting, and all this again links back to all the trade issues that we talk about in the first few questions. And you know, we are heavily dependent on trade and our ports, and a lot of ships will stop over in Singapore, obviously, to refuel, to resupply. But up north, and that really scares us to death, not just on a trade level, but it's actually a few years ago already, the ships actually made it through the Arctic. And because the ice caps have melted so much, the ships are now able to pass through, and that cuts their journey time significantly. So instead of needing to come through Singapore at the bottom, they can now go up in the Arctic and sail through to reach China and the rest of the world without coming through Singapore. So that's scary on two fronts. One, obviously, trade in Singapore is going to be heavily impacted. We're the second busiest port in the world. All our business will be gone. And two, the ice caps melting that quickly is a huge concern for the survival of all of us. So we're doing quite a fair bit in Singapore to adapt to climate change. If you realize, Singapore is going up higher now. Whenever we reclaim land, if I'm not wrong, we're putting it at 2 meters above sea level, or even increasing it to 3 meters, so that any rise in sea level, we will be able to adapt to it. At the same time, then we're putting in efforts to mitigate to it, so net zero emissions by the second half of this century. Of course, many people will say whether that's ambitious enough, because that's going to be in this century. The second half is quite some time away, but we have other plans that we're developing, so to make sure that we can green our transport, so to make sure that we have green vehicles, private vehicles, green buses, public transport, greening our buildings as well. We're looking at the carbon tax, which we have introduced and started collection last year, on whether there's a need to increase it. It's very low now at $5 per ton, so there's been a fair bit of calls to increase that, but we Actually, I guess as always, doing a whole round of consultations. So this Sunday, we were consulting again to see what are the issues that people want us to bring up in Parliament and to debate and what policies that we want to change.
Okay, great. And talking about climate change, do you think that the public sentiment in Singapore is strong enough to be anti-climate change and to be very eco-conscious? So let me just share something that I noticed being the only Singaporean in this in the classroom here. So before this, I wasn't very conscious about my single-use plastic bag usage, okay? And one thing that pretty much everyone in the room has asked me was, why do they always give so many plastic bags in Singapore? And this is a question that I didn't really think about before, because I think for many Singaporeans, single-use plastic bags are kind of an expected part of the retail experience. We don't really think too much about it. It shouldn't be, but I didn't think, or to be honest, I didn't think much of it before. And now, as I'm learning about policies in other countries, I realize that many countries around us have imposed like bans on plastic bags or introduced legislation to say that, you know, plastic bags have to be should come with a charge. So I want to know, like, what do you think we should be doing about plastic? What's your position?
So the first position really is you cannot ban plastic bags in Singapore. Why? Because the majority of us, including me, live in high-rise apartments. And you need the plastic bag to bag the trash. And without bagging the trash, there's a whole other series of problems. And so I won't go into all that, but it is a given that we need to have plastic bags in Singapore, but we need to reduce, and that's the key that I've been pushing now. So you're right, I asked everybody and they will say, plastic bags they give is already paid for, right? So just take. And I ask them sometimes, why do you double bag your items? And everybody will say, it's not my fault, it's the cashier. Why do you take so many bags? It's the cashier. And I think we live in that society, right? It's always somebody else's fault. But whenever I ask people now, if I introduce this, 10 cents per bag, will you still double bag your bag? And will double bag your items? And everybody will say no. And they will always say, then I'll stop the cashier. Don't give me so many bags. It's 10 cents each. And that's why I raised this in Parliament and through an adjournment motion to try and introduce a plastic bag charge here. And again, as you rightly said, in other countries, in Hong Kong, in Australia, in UK, where they've introduced this plastic bag charge, it has changed the consumer behavior significantly. In fact, in England, I think they've just last year doubled the plastic bag charge. And if you go to England now, I don't think anybody dares to use plastic bag. They look at you funny if you use a plastic bag. Everybody, my in-laws are actually British. From using plastic bag previously, I mean, they're all using reusable bags now. It's sort of embedded into them now to bring reusable bags whenever they go shopping. So I've seen that. I've seen that the values and behaviors can be shaped through policies. And that's why I wanted the government to then introduce the plastic bag charge. And to be honest, Prime Minister actually agreed with me. He did a Facebook post that he said it makes sense to have this plastic bag charge to shape behavior. So that's going to be work in progress still. And I'll continue to fight for that because plastic is one of the worst things I've seen. If you know, we're building a nature park in my constituency now, the Khatib Bongsu Nature Park. I've been doing a lot of coastal cleanups, bringing the kids out. 30th this month, we're going out again. And the amount of plastic that you see in our waters is just insane. In fact, if you, and I don't know whether you can organize a trip, but if you go down and see it, most of the people that go and see it, they actually get quite upset. They didn't realize that it's such a huge problem. I'm sure you all know the Christmas trees, but if you go to our mangrove forest, you see a lot of Christmas trees, and it's not the little decorations that you see up there. Actually, most of the decoration is plastic bags. Because at high tide, the plastic comes in, and then it gets caught under the trees. At low tide, the water recedes, and all the items are just stuck on the tree. And it's quite a sad sight where you see trees just filled with trash now. You see a lot of surgical masks. I think the media has shown some of the videos of our trips. You see trees with all just surgical masks hanging on it now. And that I see is a huge plastic problem. In Singapore, we have an effective waste management system where we burn everything, but in a lot of the other countries, the plastic is just dumped into the ocean. If you have seen, unfortunately, the whale that died in Singapore, quite likely hit by a propeller ship. In fact, inside the body, when we did the autopsy, is just filled with plastic as well. In fact, there's some who believe that the fellow died because of the plastic. Same with a lot of dolphins that we find. If you if you've seen along the food chain, it gets quite scary now. I think it's Blue Planet, I can't remember the name of the movie, where they looked at the birds in the Pacific Islands, and some of the seabirds that feed on fish. You've seen that footage, is actually quite scary, and you see how far along it's gone down the food chain. So the fish has microplastic in them, the birds eat it, the birds regurgitate it to feed their fledglings, their baby birds, and they're actually finding plastic in the baby birds now. And that's how far plastic has gone along the food chain, from when you buy it to when you throw it to when other animals eat it, the other animals eat the animal regurgitates it, and we're now finding it in the baby birds. And in fact, that's the question that I've asked in Parliament just 2 weeks ago, whether we're now studying in local seafood that's being bred in Singapore waters, in our Kelong, whether we're now finding microplastic in them. And I'll raise this again actually in 2 weeks' time in Parliament. Because believe it or not, the studies have shown quite conclusively, for those of you that eat seafood, you are actually eating plastic already. It's all in the food chain now.
And do you think that for microplastics in oceans and such, we would require cooperation with other countries, our neighboring countries as well? How do you think we can work together more closely with them in the future to combat this?
So we are, but I think we can do more. So that's what, I raised that question. It's so weird. I just raised that question in Parliament, exactly that, to ask Minister whether, with our coastal cleanup as well, it's never ending. I mean, I've done this for a few years now. You can clean it up, and the next day you come and it's covered in trash again. And so I've asked whether we can now work with our neighboring countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, to help with their waste management, waste disposal plans, and to see how we can stop some of the waste that's coming in from the other countries. Of course, not everything is from Malaysia and Indonesia, but you have no doubt when you do the coastal cleanups, if you look at the packaging, it is guaranteed from other countries. So seeing how we can go upstream, work at the ASEAN level to tackle the marine waste.
Okay, great. And maybe as one of the final questions, what I want to ask is really about where do you see Singapore's environment in 2050? How do you see us in terms of energy, waste management? What's your vision? So the vision is what we've announced, which is we want to go net zero emissions. So to be a low carbon, low emission economy, to focus on cleaner energy, and that's why we're looking a lot at our solar panels. Unfortunately, that's all we have in Singapore. We have no wind, we have no water, no hydro, and we clearly cannot have nuclear. Because we're so small, one little accident will wipe out our entire country. So we're down to solar. And so that's our focus now on clean energy. We're also looking at how we can recycle. So, everybody does a lot of recycling now, but we're looking at how we can recycle our emissions. So carbon capture is one thing that we are focusing on. But I think we're heading in the right direction. Of course, as always, I feel we can do a lot more so that we can head in the right direction at a faster pace. And how do you think the youths of Singapore and also the world can contribute to this vision? Like, what do you hope that we can do?
So the individual is the most important thing. As an individual, you can do a lot. I can still see a lot of plastic bottles, single-use plastic bottles around. I'm quite known for that in Parliament when I keep pointing out when people bring plastic bottles into Parliament. So in Parliament, as a start, we've also phased this out. No more plastic bottles in the whole of Parliament now. And so that as an individual, you can do a lot to make an impact. We can reduce, reuse, recycle. You've heard that. But I've always said that there's the biggest thing that we forget, which is to refuse. So refuse using a single-use items. You don't need a straw. You don't need a single-use plastic bottles. You can start with that. And if everybody starts with one small little thing, then we can change this world. I've always used that quote. I started off as one individual with A.C.R.E.S. It still puts there as founder, but I've stepped down from my position after 20 years of running that organization. Starting off as one person, I always remember my mom. My mom hates it because I always tell this story. But my mom told me 20 years ago that as one person, you cannot make a difference. Why do you want to try and start this group and change things in Singapore? But I always use this quote which reads, I'm only one, but still I'm one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And as an individual, you can do a lot. Maybe not change the world overnight, but if each one of us start doing it, and ultimately this world will become a better place for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ng. It's been a true pleasure and honor for us to be here and share the stage with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the rest of the groups. There is the first one. It's, do you think that Singapore can be a leading countries in this kind of environmental issues? It means that as a quite small island, small city, to what extent Singapore can be like a pioneer? We can see that when they said that we want to change the red dot to the green dot, actually, it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, we continue to have a lot of cars, as it has been mentioned about plastic bag and so on and so forth. So to what extent actually Singapore can be seen as an example for the rest of the world, as it could be sometime for other things, such as like desalinizations, waters, and so on. So on one hand, Singapore can be an example for the rest of the world. On the other hand, they have some strategy, but to what extent they really want to do it, this kind of green strategy for the rest of the world, and be an example?
I think actually we are leading this in Asia now. At least in this region, we are leading the efforts in terms of sustainability, in terms of fighting climate change. In ASEAN, if you look, we are actually the first to introduce a carbon tax. So to put a direct impact on the highest polluters in Singapore, to start paying a carbon tax of $5 per ton, we're committed to review that by 2023, so in 2 years' time, to increase it possibly to $10 to $15, so double or triple it by 2030, and to review that process. I think we're the first to make the commitment that we will green our entire private transport by 2040, which is electric or hybrid, and we're building all the charging stations now. By 2030, I think we're increasing the number of charging stations. We've made the commitment to green our public transports, as I shared earlier, by 2040, so to only have electric buses running in Singapore within 19 years. To be honest, I've always said it's quite a bold commitment. I'm not sure how we can build up the charging infrastructure so fast. So to go from, I can't remember, but less than 1% of electric vehicles now to 100% in 20 years, that will be an achievement. But again, that's the targets that we have set, which I think is a bold target. I'm hopeful that we can achieve it. Again, the green buildings, all those that we've shared, we've signed on to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We've updated our emissions strategy. So all that I think that we have done has shown that we are, as I've shared, I think we are not just can be, but I think we are leading the region in terms of climate change. And I think that's important, as I stress, even in my work in animal welfare. I think when Singapore does something, the rest of the world does see and try and understand why Singapore does it and how we do it. And I think once Singapore can make this change, I do believe that a lot of countries will start to follow.
Thank you. One question about A.C.R.E. Actually, first, why have you decided to create A.C.R.E. in Singapore? And to go quite the same topic, do you think that animal interest and right will be increasing at state by 2050? Are you confident in the progress of the animal cause for the coming years? So basically, what you've done in Singapore, why have you decided to create A.C.R.E.s? And more globally, what do you think about animal right?
So it's a pretty long story, you know. But it started when I was 14. When I watched a movie with my mom called Gorillas in the Mist. That told the life story of Diane Fossey, this American lady who left her good life in America to go to Africa to save gorillas. And I remember watching that movie halfway through. This was a long time ago now, but I turned to my mom and I told her, "Mommy, I want to be just like Diane once I grow up." Mommy freaked out because, if you know the story, Diane was murdered by the poachers. They killed her and she told, "Oh my God, my son wants to do this when he grows up." But I started volunteering at SPCA. I read up a lot about animals, and as you've heard, I did my degree in biology, my master's in primate conservation. But I'm trying to think of the dates now. More than 20 years ago, 22 years ago, I started volunteering at the Singapore Zoo. And I was one of the first, in fact, I was the first chimpanzee volunteer zookeeper. And I looked after the chimps. Part of my work was chimp photography, where we used to put baby chimps on your lap to take photos. We've stopped that practice now, but I was a photographer, and I got very close to this baby chimp called Ramba. She was less than a year old then, but she loved to play. She loved to always put my hand on her hips to tickle her. I'm not sure if you know, you tickle chimps, they actually laugh, just like us humans. And the only difference is they actually love being tickled. Somehow, that's probably that 1% genetic difference. They enjoy being tickled all the time. But something that Ramba didn't enjoy really was photography. And she misbehaved quite a fair bit, and to train her and to discipline her the keeper used to grab her by the head when she misbehaved and punch her in the face. And at one point when she was punched, she hugged me and she sat on my lap, and you can't see, but she pulled down her lip to check whether her lips were bleeding. And that changed my life in 1999. Advocacy was at its very infancy stage in Singapore, but as an undergraduate in the National University of Singapore, I decided I would speak up. The zoo fired me for speaking up, and they told me quite infamously, "You're just a small boy, you will never win." And I approached the Straits Times, and somehow the reporter, Eunice Lau, believed in my story. With no proof whatsoever, she published it. It gave us prime news. The caption was, "Zoo takes flag for chimp photography." It took me about 2 years of campaigning, but we succeeded. The zoo invited me back 2 years later, I think in 2001, to witness the release of Ramba. Released because they took Ramba away from her mother when she was about a year old when I was there, because the mother would never let you take her daughter away every day for photography. So they forcibly removed her, kept her in a cage all by herself. For about 3 years, she never saw her mother, maybe could hear her, could smell her, but could not touch her. And I think to everyone's amazement, and perhaps to the zoo's horror, with the media there and myself, when they opened the gates, Ramba ran straight to her mother, Susie. And they actually hugged, you know. And that's the Straits Times photo, if you look back in 2001 or 2000. And there's a photo of Ramba with her mother, and the caption is Ramba reunited with Susie. And Susie, the mother, was actually grooming the daughter as a sign of affection. Of course, they hug as well, like us humans. The other way they show affection to each other is they groom each other in their fur and their hair. And that changed my life. I remember the reporter Eunice asked me, "So what's next?" And I told her if I could devote this few years of my life towards helping 3 chimpanzees, Poco, Gombe, and Ramba, who were used for photography, if I devote the rest of my life towards doing this work, I could save a lot more animals and make a bigger difference. And that was how A.C.R.E.S was born. And the first board member, actually, it's a beautiful story because Eunice Lau, the reporter that broke this story, was the first board member for A.C.R.E.S. She believed in it and joined me to set up this group, which is about 20 years old this year. And our focus really is on industrialized animal cruelty. So everybody saw the baby chimp and thought, so nice, take a photo with the baby. We have a nice souvenir from coming to the zoo. The chimp looks happy, but very few people knew the story that I just shared with you, what goes on behind the scenes of how they train them up, how they're removed from their parents. And that's what A.C.R.E.S set out to do. Not just as the cruelty that you see right in front of you, like kicking a dog. That's very easy to say that's cruel, but marine parks, zoos, wildlife trade, factory farming, all those are issues that you don't see and that we want to bring to the forefront and show you what goes on behind the scenes so that you can make a more informed decision.
Thank you very much.
I do think that animal welfare has changed significantly from 20 years ago to now, and it's a very good change.
Yeah, maybe not so much time, maybe last question.
Thank you, Mr. Wong, for all the insights that you shared with us today. It's really nice to have you here. I would just to think about what you said earlier about the social composition of Singapore, and what you actually presented us was very much of an ideal, I could say, picture of how Singapore is made of different backgrounds. Surely when you get, for example, in the tube, you get to see and mingle with, you know, a vast array of different people. But behind that, and when you actually dig deeper, and I've been talking with people from minority groups, they've told me that the reality is quite different in the sense that there's a over-representation of Chinese ethnic people in the elite, and as much as there could be a white privilege in the Western world, there seems to be a Chinese ethnic privilege here. So instead of being a force for the coming decades, do you think that is detrimental for the advancement of a first world country just like Singapore? Thank you.
Thank you. So the reality is that we are a Chinese majority population. But the other reality is that we are focused heavily and we believe in meritocracy, which means that whatever your background is, you have a chance to succeed in Singapore, despite whether you're Chinese, you're Malay, or you're Indian. And again, we believe in meritocracy, but I've always said it is work in progress. And that's why one of the things I've been fighting for is trying to make sure there is this active integration that you have raised. So not just in a housing policy, but even in our schools. And that's why I fought hard to abolish streaming. And we saw that with streaming, where at your PSLE at primary 6, the reality was that your score is positively correlated to your socio-economic status, which means the poorer you are, the lower your grades is. And then once you have a lower grade, we will then stream you into the normal technical stream. I think you'll be more familiar with that, which means that all the poorer grade students will be placed together. Those with slightly better grades will go to the normal academic, and those with better grades then will go to your express stream. And we saw that differentiation was based, we thought it was based on educational results. But the reality was we were actually streaming people based on socio-economic status. The other reality is, yes, you will see a higher percentage of the other races in the normal technical stream. So I fought hard to abolish that streaming so that meritocracy can continue to thrive. And because we realized that once you go into normal technical at 13 years old, your life is sort of gone. The odds of you going to university is slim. We realized that in the autonomous university, only 1% of graduates came from the normal technical stream. In terms of diploma graduates, only 5% came from normal technical stream. So the minute at 12 years old, where we sort of grade you, your PSLE, put you into that class at 13 years old, the rest of your life is sort of fixed. And that's why we decided to abolish streaming, and then to sort of group them into different educational backgrounds, and so then different socioeconomic status into the classroom. And that's sort of to merge and get more inclusiveness and to break that kind of social stratification, and perhaps to make sure that there isn't a whole class of Chinese students as well. And that will mix well. The other thing that we're doing is, as you rightly point out, in our rental blocks, so that's for the lower income, those who cannot afford to buy a house, they can rent from the government. Of course, we realize again that there is, those would without a doubt be from lower socioeconomic status, but there is also a race profile in those blocks. And that's why I fought hard to break that sort of a cluster where in my area, it's block 269A and B is my rental blocks. They sort of live in isolation. And that's what I raised in Parliament, that you have two blocks there. Opposite is the industrial side. Behind is the Northland Secondary School field. On the side is the Northland Secondary. You have to cross the road before you reach the other public housing estates. And there's a huge stigma then that you're from the rental blocks. There's a whole cluster of you there. And so I'm grateful. We've now done something we call integrated blocks, where again we want more social mixing, where you can have a 5-room flat with a 4-room flat with a rental flat. And that way there isn't this cluster of this social stratification in terms of the lower income all in one block. And I think that will help again as we fight hard to break the social stratification now, to ensure there's more mixing, and then I think we can get better outcomes in terms of meritocracy. There's the one last thing, which is what we call the A.C.R.E.S schools, where there is a huge concentration of Chinese students, and I think you might go into that direction, where there is a huge concentration of elites as well. And that's something that I've been raising in Parliament on how we can have more social mixing in those schools. Because those, by default, are Chinese schools. If you're Malay and you go there, you can, but you have to learn Chinese. And that, I think we're running out of time, but we've been debating this in Parliament. That's really to bring the Chinese culture back and the language back in the olden days. Because as we started off with, we decided to go with English. Chinese was left out, so we had those schools there to try and make sure that Chinese language remained. But whether it is still necessary now in Singapore society, I don't know. I would hope that, again, there's more social mixing, and that's what I've been raising. How would then a student that goes to a A.C.R.E.S school in Singapore have proper social mixing when the majority of the students in the class will be Chinese, and it looks like from a higher socioeconomic status? The minister has replied that they now try to partner the A.C.R.E.S school with other schools, so there is social mixing when they do their CCAs and all, but I'm not sure if that is enough. So, work in progress.
Maybe the word to conclude, because that's the topic of the week, how Singapore will be in 2050.
How Singapore will be in 2050, I think, again, that we're pushing hard to make sure that we are the green hub, where people can live close to park and close to being a city in nature. I want to make sure that we can not just focus always on the dollars and cents, and that's why I think the work-life balance is important. So not just to be an economic powerhouse in this region, but to also be a place where people can truly call their home and where they can have fun and then spend time with their family.
Thank you very much, Luis, for being with us today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all students. Now you have to join your tutors in the respective room, and the next conference would be at 11:30. So be focused and be on time at 11:30 in the room in order to start on time with the next conference. Thank you very much.